You may be seated.
Good evening. It's good to see you here this evening. I add my words of appreciation to those that have already been spoken for the presence of all who are here tonight. It is good to see you here. And we have a good crowd tonight, and that's really great to see. If you would be turning to the book of 2 Samuel, we're going to be taking the thoughts of our lesson from 2 Samuel chapter 6 tonight. In an incident, I don't know, I got thinking about it, I don't know if there is another incident quite like this where you had so many people with so many good intentions that things went so bad. And we're going to take a look at that situation tonight and see if we can come to some conclusions about why exactly that was. What went wrong when David desired to move the Ark of the Covenant from the house of Abinadab over to the city of Jerusalem? A little background before we get into actually 2 Samuel chapter 6. When you go back to the book of 1 Samuel, this is at the very beginning of Samuel's duties as a prophet in the land of Israel. In the time of the high priest Eli and his two worthless sons, you find that the children of Israel go out to battle against the Philistines in chapter 4. And things don't go well. They lose several thousand of their soldiers in that battle against the Philistines. And the reason for that is because God was not with these people. God had already determined, and He had told Samuel what He was going to do, and that was that He was going to punish the children of Israel because they were in a particular time that was evil. They were not obeying the will of God, and so God was going to punish them. He's going to use the Philistines to do it. And so they go up to battle against the Philistines, and I think it's 3,000 who died in that first battle. And so the Israelite army decided that what we need to do, you see, the problem is that we didn't have the Ark of the Covenant with us, and so what we're going to do, we're going to get the Ark of the Covenant, which is the presence of God with us, and we're going to take it to the battle. And that way we can't help but win. When the Ark of the Covenant's with us, we're going to win that battle. It was a classic mistake that the children of Israel made over and over and over again. The idea that this physical manifestation of God's presence automatically meant that God was going to be with them. They made this mistake with the Ark of the Covenant. That if the Ark of the Covenant was with them, this box was with them, that meant God would be with them. Made the same mistake in Ezekiel's time with the temple, that God won't destroy the city of Jerusalem because God's dwelling place is here. And so that's what's significant when you go over to the book of Ezekiel and you see Ezekiel describing the glory of the Lord leaving that temple. Well, what that's saying is, yes, the building is still there, but God is not. And the same thing was true here in the Ark of the Covenant. The ark was with them, but the problem is that God was no longer with that ark. And so they take the ark, kind of using it as a good luck charm. They go out to battle, and they have the ark this time. This time, 50,000 are put to death, and the Ark of the Covenant is captured by the Philistines. That's 1 Samuel chapter 4. In chapter 5, we find that things do not go well with the Philistines when they capture the ark. They first bring it to Ashdod, and Ashdod's god Dagon, they put it in his temple, and it's one of my favorite passages in all of the Old Testament scriptures. They put it in the presence of their god Dagon. They come back the next day, and Dagon has fallen over, and he is bowing down to the Ark of the Covenant. And they set him back up and leave him overnight again. When they come back the next day, not only has he fallen down before the Ark of the Covenant again, but now his head and his hands are gone. And all that's left is his fish body. The mind is gone, and the activity, the hands are gone. Dagon is shown to be the absolute unknowledgeable, unpowerful God that he is for the Philistines. And so they also got tumors. And so they put up with that for a little bit, and then they decided, no, we've got to get rid of this ark. And so they send the ark away, and this time they send it to Gath, the second of the 5 cities of the Philistines. And there again, the people of Gath get these tumors, and so they say, we can't keep this thing here. And so they send it to Ekron. I don't know why Ekron got why they were the choice for this. I tell you, if you have friends like that, you don't need enemies. But it even went worse for the people of Gath, or for Ekron. Some were struck dead. They got tumors again, and there was an infestation of rats that were killing these people. Finally, they got enough of it, and in 1 Samuel chapter 7, chapter 6, they sent the ark to a border town that was controlled by the Israelites called Beth Shemesh. They put it on an ark, or on a cart pulled by 2 milk cows. And then in 1 Samuel chapter 7, at Beth Shemesh's request, the ark was brought to the house of Abinadab, and it remained there for Saul's 40 years of his reign. And so that's the background story. When you come to 2 Samuel chapter 6, fast forward 60 years, and now David is the king. Saul has had his 40-year reign. David has begun his rule. He has captured the city of Jebus, and he renames it Jerusalem, and he makes it his capital city. And his desire is to bring the Ark of the Covenant to that capital city of Jerusalem, where it can be close, it can be in the capital, it can be safe, and it can be there near David. And so in chapter 6 of 2 Samuel, beginning at verse 1, 2 Samuel chapter 6, beginning at verse 1, it says, again, David gathered all the choice men of Israel, 30,000. And David arose and went with all the people who were with him from Baal, Judah, to bring up from there the ark of God, whose name is called by the name, the Lord of hosts, who dwells between the cherubim. So David gathers his men together, and they're going to have this celebratory parade, and they're going to bring this ark from where it sits in Abinadab's house to the city of Jerusalem. In verse 3 it says, so they set the ark of God on a new cart and brought it out of the house of Abinadab, which was on the hill. And Uzzah and Ahio, the sons of Abinadab, drove the new cart. And they brought it out of the house of Abinadab, which was on the hill, accompanying the ark of God. And Ahio went before the ark. Then David and all the house of Israel played music before the Lord on all kinds of instruments of fir wood, on harps, on stringed instruments, on tambourines, on sistrums, and on cymbals. And so they bring it out, and they put it on a new cart. Now, why would they do something like that? I would suggest to you that they did it because the last time that they knew about this ark being moved from one place to another, that's the way it was done. The Philistines, when they moved the ark from Ekron to Beth Shemesh, they did so with a new cart and 2 milk cows. And they put the ark on this cart, and they let it loose. And wherever the cows took it, that's where it would remain. And they said if they brought it into Philistia, then all these bad things that have happened to us are just happenstance. But if the cows take it over to Israel, then we'll know that it was Israel's God who did these things. And that's where it needs to be. It needs to be back with the children of Israel. And so they decide we're going to build this new cart just like the Philistines did, put the ark on it, and we're going to take it with us. And again, it's all celebratory. It is all, they are playing all kinds of instruments. There's this grand procession as they approach Jerusalem. But then at verse 6 it says, "And when they came to Nikon's threshing floor, Uzzah put out his hand to the ark of God and took hold of it, for the oxen stumbled." And so the oxen stumble at this threshing floor. And Uzzah, who is guiding this cart, reaches out his hand and he steadies the Ark of the Covenant. And you would think that this would be ticker tape parade for Uzzah. Can you imagine the horror of this scene as an ox stumbles and the cart goes falling off the ark goes falling off this cart, and the lid comes off of it. It may break and tumble down the hill, and the horror of that scene, all of the things that are in it spill out. What a terrible scene that was. And so Uzzah, the hero, sticks out his hand and he steadies the ark. Surely God would be pleased with that. But look at verse 7. "Then the anger of the Lord was aroused against Uzzah, and God struck him there for his error, and he died there by the ark of God." It says when Uzzah reached out his hand and he steadied that ark, while everybody else may have considered him to be a hero, God's anger was provoked. And God struck him dead right there on the spot. David's reaction, we're told in verses 8 and 9, is twofold. David became angry because of the Lord's outbreak against Uzzah. And he calls the name of the place Perez Uzzah to this day. David was afraid of the Lord that day. And he said, "How can the ark of the Lord come to me?" And so 2 reactions from David. He is moved by anger and he is moved by fear. Verses 10 and 11 say, "So David would not move the ark of the Lord with him into the city of David, but David took it aside into the house of Obed-Edom, the Gittite. The ark of the Lord remained in the house of Obed-Edom, the Gittite, 3 months, and the Lord blessed Obed-Edom and all of his household." So David determined this is not going to go on any longer. We're not going to, the ark is steadied on the cart, and so we can take it in Jerusalem. No, David says it stops right here. And so they take it into this man Obed-Edom's house. And for 3 months it stays there in Obed-Edom's house. And then in verse 12, read, "Now it was told King David, saying, The Lord has blessed the house of Obed-Edom and all that belongs to him, because of the ark of God. So David went and brought up the ark of God from the house of Obed-Edom to the city of David with gladness." Finally, they are able, after 3 months, to bring this ark to Jerusalem, to the place where David had prepared for it to be. Okay. What lessons did David learn? When David learns lessons, it teaches us some lessons as well, doesn't it? What did David learn on this day of tragedy for the children of Israel? Well, he learned, first of all, the importance of doing things God's way. Not that he didn't already understand, because we see several times even before this that David consults the Lord, especially when they were going to battle against an enemy. David would ask the Lord before he would go, should I go up? And the Lord would say either yes or no to that. But David would inquire what the will of the Lord was. But David needed a reminder. And this serves as a reminder to David that it is important to do things the way that God says to do things. And God had made some laws concerning this Ark of the Covenant. In Exodus chapter 25, verses 12 through 14, in the construction of the Ark of the Covenant, there were golden rings put on this thing, built into it, and poles that were overladen with gold were put into those rings specifically so that that ark could be carried. It was designed to be carried. Why? Because that's the way that God wanted that ark to be carried. Numbers chapter 4 and verse 15, the sons of Kohath were given charge of this ark, that they were to carry it. When everything was prepared and all the coverings were put on it, then the sons of Kohath were to pick it up and to carry it on their shoulders. And that's the only way that God dictated that that ark was to be carried. Israel, on this occasion, though they had maybe good intentions, so that maybe it was their goal to have this ark a wonderful place to rest and to glorify God in that way, they violated God's law. And I would suggest to you that when people in the Bible did that, when we do that, it always invites trouble. And you see it in the Old Testament, in Genesis chapter 3 with Adam and Eve. Everything was going wonderful in the garden until what? They violated the will of God. And then trouble came not only to their lives but to the whole world, as a result of their determination to ignore what God had said in favor of what they wanted to do. In Genesis chapter 4, Cain he's given choices. You know, he makes a bad choice. He didn't do things the way that God said to do them in the offering of a sacrifice to God. The Hebrew writer says that by faith Abel offered a better sacrifice to God. Cain, whatever it was that he did wrong, whether it wasn't the offering of the best of his things, or it was just not the offering that God wanted him to offer. We're not told what exactly Cain had done wrong. The point is that Cain, whatever he did it in violation of God's will, and so it was not of faith. And it brought trouble to his life. In Genesis chapter 11, the Tower of Babel, God had said to the people who had come out of the ark, Noah's ark, to spread through the earth and be fruitful and multiply. Instead, they decided what they would do is all gather together in this one city of Babel, and they would build this mighty tower in violation of what God had said He wanted them to do. Didn't go well, did it? In Numbers 13 and 14, the children of Israel, God wanted them to go into the land, the journey from Egypt to the Promised Land. A couple of weeks is all it should have been, especially from Sinai to the Promised Land. It shouldn't have lasted long at all. It's just a short journey from Sinai to the Promised Land. And yet they would not go in and take the land as God instructed. And so they spent 40 years wandering around in the wilderness until an entire generation of Israel had passed away. They invited trouble upon themselves because they weren't willing to do what God said for them to do in the way that God said for them to do it. Number 16, Moses was told to speak to the rock and it would bring forth water. Instead, he, in his anger, strikes the rock. He speaks, but he speaks to the people in his anger, and he strikes that rock. And it was an act of faithlessness on his part. And it didn't go well. He didn't have the opportunity to enter into the promised land with the children of Israel because of what he did on that occasion. As we studied, I think it was last week, we talked about Achan and his folly in taking of the things in the city of Jericho that God said belonged to me. Don't take any of the bounty that you gain from Jericho. And Achan took it and he hid it in his tent. And as we studied in that lesson, it didn't go well, did it? Then in King Saul in 1 Samuel chapter 15, which was in these people's, it was kind of in their day and time. They got to see what it's like to disobey God's will, to not do things in the way that God said to do them. God said, I want you to go, and I want you to utterly destroy the Amalekites. Everything, every living thing is to be destroyed. They didn't do it. Another one of those situations where if Saul is being honest on that occasion, they might have done it with some good intentions, but it wasn't according to the will of God. Because of that, it did not go well with Saul, and eventually it did not go well with the children of Israel as well. And what we need to understand about this idea of doing things God's way is that ignorance of God's way is not an excuse for not doing what God said to do. Do we think that David didn't have access to the law of Moses? That David just had no way of figuring out, even if he didn't know, he had no way of figuring out the way that this ark was to be carried? Of course he did. And later on, when he consults it, he knows exactly what is required of him. This goes back to the things that Jeremy was talking about this morning, about knowing God's will, the importance of knowing God's will and doing God's will. He talked about John chapter 13 and Jesus' statement to his disciples about the importance of both knowing and doing. A couple of other passages on that. Go over to Ephesians chapter 5. In Ephesians chapter 5, the Apostle Paul, in writing to the Ephesian church, emphasizes to them the importance of knowing and doing, understanding what God requires and doing that. Verse 15, see then that you walk circumspectly, that is, with wisdom, with an understanding of what is going on and guide, the path that you are going. Walk in the way that God would have you to walk is the point there. Not as fools, but as wise, redeeming the time because the days are evil. Therefore, do not be unwise, but understand what the will of the Lord is. So verse 15, the importance of walking in the way that God wants us to walk. Verse 17, the importance of understanding this life, understanding your responsibility, understanding what path you are to go. Before you ever begin to walk it, walk with understanding. We see again in Colossians chapter 1 the same idea, this pairing of knowledge and understanding and doing what God has said to do. Colossians chapter 1 verse 9, for this reason we also, since the day we heard it, do not cease to pray for you and to ask that you may be filled, with the knowledge of His will in all wisdom and spiritual understanding. He said, I'm praying for you people. I want you to know that you are in my prayers, that you would walk with knowledge, that you would be filled with knowledge, the knowledge that comes from God. Why? So that they can walk as they need to walk. Verse 10, that you may walk worthy of the Lord, fully pleasing Him, being fruitful in every good work and increasing in the knowledge of God. And so he says, I want you to walk worthy. And the only way that you can walk worthy is when you know the will of God and committed to what you know that you need to do. Knowledge combined with understanding and determination to do what God says to do is, I have there, important. It is vital. It is absolutely necessary if we're going to live the kind of moral life that God wants us to live. If our families are going to be what we want our families to be, it is important that we know God's will for our families and that we are determined to walk according to God's will for our families. In our social lives, it is important to understand what the Word of God says to us about God's will for us in our friendships, our workplace, whatever it may be in the social arena. That we commit ourselves and that we walk in that way that God would have us to walk. And in our church life, as we associate with one another, it is important as we are in the church together, and we are the church together, that we have understanding of how God wants us to live together in this wonderful relationship, what He wants us to do together. What David was reminded of and what we are reminded of in this story is the importance of doing things the way that God said we need to do things. And the second thing that David would have been impressed upon him is the importance of a proper reaction to the consequences of sin. Uzzah lost his life as a consequence of the sin that began in the wrong way of moving that ark and continued in Uzzah reaching out his hand to steady the ark. And it's interesting to me how David reacts on this occasion. Two things, as we noted earlier. First of all, he got angry. My question would be, who did he get angry at? Ever wondered that? What was going on in David's mind that made him angry? Was he angry at the Lord for doing this? You know, that happens a lot. You ever seen somebody who ignores the will of God and then bad things happen? As God said, bad things will happen. And instead of being humbled by that, they become angry at God because bad things have happened to them. It's a phenomenon that happens over and over and over again. Was David angry at the Lord because the Lord did what the Lord said He would do if someone violated His will in this way? If the Lord has issued warnings, we must not blame Him when what He warned us about comes to pass. Well, maybe David wasn't angry at the Lord, and I think probably David was not angry at the Lord. But maybe he was angry at Uzzah. Uzzah, why did you do that? You ruined the whole thing, reaching out your hand and steadying that ark. You just ruined it for us all. You think maybe he was mad at Uzzah? Well, David needed to understand that when he pointed one finger at Uzzah, he would have been pointing 3 fingers back at himself. Because it began with the bad decision on David's part. And David was just as at fault, if not more at fault, than was Uzzah. Maybe David was mad at himself. And that's what I would like to think here. That David was angry with himself because of the decision that he had made that led to this situation. And we're reminded in this that when we sin, it is important that we take personal responsibility, not only for the guilt of the sin that we have committed, but for the consequences that come our way as well. We have no right to get angry with God at the consequences of sin. We have no right to get mad at someone else for the consequences of our sin. If we're going to be mad at somebody, we need to be angry with ourselves. In Genesis 13, verse 12 beginning, and then down to verse 13 and 14, when God confronts Adam and Eve about their sin, first he confronts Eve. No, I'm sorry, he confronts Adam in verse 12. And Adam says, not only it's her fault, but it's your fault. This woman that you gave me, she gave me to eat, and I ate. Lord, this is not on me. It's on her for giving me that. And even more than that, it's on you. I heard someone say the other day, Adam's excuse is, well, I went to sleep. When I woke up, I was married. Lord, it's your fault that this has happened. We need to beware that blame game. God didn't accept blame for Adam's sin in Genesis chapter 3, and He doesn't accept blame for our sin today. There in Genesis 4, verses 6 and 7, let's go back over there. And I want you to notice the choice that God had given there to Cain about how he conducted himself. Cain is angry because the Lord has rejected his sacrifice. In verse 6, so the Lord said to Cain, why are you angry? And why is your countenance fallen? If you do well, will you not be accepted? But if you do not do well, sin lies at the door and its desires for you, but you should rule over it. What's God telling Cain there? He's telling him, it's your choice. You can either have your sacrifice accepted, or you cannot have your sacrifice accepted. You can live a life filled with anger and frustration, or you can live a life filled with happiness. It's up to you. You have to determine which you want and then act accordingly. So Cain had a choice, just like everybody has a choice. What do you want to do with your life? How do you want to be reacted to by God? It's your choice. Galatians 6 and verse 5. Paul reminds the Galatian churches that each one must bear his own load. And what he's saying there in that verse is that your relationship with God is a matter of you taking on the responsibility that God has given to you, of knowing God's will and of doing God's will. It's important that we understand why we suffer the consequences as we do, and be willing to accept the consequences of the sin that we commit. Maybe being angry at ourselves for doing so, but certainly not being angry at God. Secondly, he got fearful. He got mad. And then I think what that passage is telling us, after his initial reaction of anger, he becomes afraid. But I'll tell you, he did three things that are important for him on this occasion. A reaction to his fear. Now he's afraid, but he's not afraid of himself. He's not afraid of others. Now he's afraid of God. First thing he did was he ensured that he and the people would never forget what the consequences of that sin was. He named this place Perez Uzzah, which meant outburst against Uzzah. So that every time the children of Israel would walk by this place and they knew the name of it, they'd remember, oh yeah, this is where we violated the will of God and had to suffer the consequences of it. That's the first thing he did. The second thing he did is he committed himself to not taking one single step toward Jerusalem with that ark until he knew what the proper steps were to take. Why did everything stop right there? Because David had some things that he needed to do. He had some investigating that he needed to make. He had some changes that needed to be made. And he was not going to take one further step until he knew what he didn't know now, until he did what he wasn't doing now. And the third thing he did is he went on a search for what the Lord wanted. So that in 1 Chronicles chapter 15, which is about the same incident, it is a parallel passage. In 1 Chronicles chapter 15, he tells the people, okay, we did it wrong the first time. Here's the right way to do it. This ark's going to have to be carried. It's going to have to be carried by the Kohathites. And until he figured that out, until he was determined to do what God had said he wanted done, he progressed not 1 inch. And then, third lesson that David would have learned and that we need to learn from this is life sure does get better when we know and do God's will. Genesis chapter 4 and verse 7, that is God's message to Cain. If you do well, will you not be accepted? Cain, do you want things to go well with you? Here's how you do it. You do well. In that context, it means you do what my will is, and life will be good for you. Go over to 1 Peter chapter 3. In 1 Peter chapter 3, I want to begin reading at verse 8. 1 Peter chapter 3 and verse 8 says, "Finally, all of you be of one mind, having compassion for one another, love as brothers. Be tender-hearted, be courteous, not returning evil for evil or reviling for reviling, but on the contrary blessing, knowing that you were called to this, that you may inherit a blessing. For he who would love life and see good days, let him refrain his tongue from evil and his lips from speaking deceit. Let him turn away from evil and do good. Let him seek peace and pursue it. For the eyes of the Lord are on the righteous, and his ears are open to their prayers. But the face of the Lord is against those who do evil." Can you imagine living in a world where that was the rule of the day? Where what he describes there about being at peace with one another and not taking vengeance for evil that is done. When someone reviles you, not reviling back. Being compassionate toward people. Can you imagine what this world would be like if every single person in this world lived according to those rules? How much better this world would be? The fact of the matter is, it's not ever going to be that. The majority of this world has always practiced evil for evil. The majority of this world has always reviled in response to reviling. The majority of this world has always reacted to bad things with bad things back. And that's just the way it's going to be. And we can't do anything about that. We can try. But I'll tell you what we can do. We can make our little portion of the world better. We can do that by committing ourselves to knowledge of God's will and determination to do what God has said to do. If I determine to do that and you determine to do that in response to cursing, you're going to give blessing. In response to evil, you're going to do good. In response to hardness, you're going to be merciful. If every single one of us determines that for us, then for us, this world will be a better place. When I make that determination that in every relationship of life, I'm going to be what God wants me to be, things are going to go well for me. And when you do that, things will be better for you as well. So no, we can't change the world. It'd be nice if we could, but we can't. What we can do is have a powerful influence on our little section of it. And that's what I would encourage all of us to do. To understand that life sure is better when we know and we do God's will. And that's our sermon for tonight. I hope it'll be a benefit to you as you go out into the world and seek to make this world a better place. You'll see the importance of knowing God's will and being obedient to God's will. Perhaps there's someone in our audience this evening who needs to do what they know that they need to do, and that is be obedient to the gospel of Jesus Christ. Perhaps you've not yet become a Christian and you need to do so. My encouragement to you is do what Ananias told Saul of Tarsus: arise and be baptized and wash away your sins, calling on the name of the Lord. Can we help you to do that tonight? All you have to do is let us know. Or if we can help you in any other way, maybe as a Christian, you need prayers of encouragement. Our prayers for God's forgiveness because you're not living as you ought to live, and now you're determined that you're going to do that. Can we help you in that determination? If we can help you in any way, in your response to the grace of God that comes through His Son, Jesus Christ, let us know how we can by coming forward right now. On Together We Stand and Sing.